Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Intimacy. It's a word that evokes all kinds of responses. Some people erroneously believe it solely relates to sex. It doesn't. Some people fear it, and as you'll hear, there are compelling reasons for us to learn how to navigate it well. But what is intimacy? Why is it important? And how can we have more of it? These and other questions will be answered by a true expert, Dr. James Cordova. James is a distinguished professor of psychology at Clark University, and he's the author of a book I loved called The Mindful Path to Intimacy, Cultivating a Deeper Connection with Your Partner. So if you care about connection, and I bet you do, this book is required reading. Listen in as James explains mindful intimacy. Dr. James Cordova, who's asked me to call him James, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh my goodness. Your book, as I was telling you offline, I've read a lot of books on couples and on how to maximize what I consider the primary driver to what I believe to be a good life. And that is the quality of our relationships. And there's nothing more powerful in the kind of pie chart of relationships than our primary relationships. You've invested so much of your knowledge and embedded it all for the reader to easily grasp at some otherwise heady or difficult concepts, but you've made it very easy for the reader to understand through metaphor and through practice how we can improve our relationships. I was wondering if we could just start off just for the sake of taxonomy.
Sure.
What is intimacy?
Yeah, good question. So for me, when I think about this, and I've been studying and writing about this for a while, it kind of all boils down to our sort of lived experience of vulnerability in our relationships and how that vulnerability is met by our partners. So we say that intimacy is vulnerability met with warmth. And ideally, what we're looking for is that experience where, right in those places where we feel the most fragile, the most exposed, where it feels the most vulnerable to hurt or injury or rejection, we actually end up having the experience of safety, right? Of, oh, with you, I'm safe being vulnerable. And we call that intimate safety. So when we make ourselves vulnerable and our partner meets that with warmth, with kindness, with openness, then there's just this whole body experience that feels like coming home, right? Like, oh, of all the people in the world that I might feel maybe a little bit scared of, with you, I'm starting to feel safe.
Thinking about that as a variable in relationship, and it's got to be correlated with longevity. I would think that this type of intimacy, and I think about Amy Edmondson out of Harvard Business School, who writes extensively about psychological safety, and she's, I believe, the person who even coined the term. She blessed this podcast with a really great interview as well. And I asked her if the business case of psychological safety could also be applied in the context of relationship. And she said, absolutely. And so here you come along and put out this book, basically talking in slightly different taxonomy about the same idea. And one of the things we know about psychological safety is it's highly correlated with longevity. And I remember when I was considering thoughtfully who I wanted to marry, this was a criterion, but I didn't know how to name it the way you've named it. But fortunately, I did find it. So I'm really just grateful to you for helping people along the way. A lot of people conflate the words intimacy with eroticism. And like, I was intimate last night and I was like, yeah, what does that mean? You had a really deep conversation. Could you
I know.
could you please unblend these terms
Yeah.
of intimacy and eroticism, which are often conflated?
Right. I love that. And often, when I'm working with couples, that is their first sort of instinct. Are we talking about sex? And I'm like, well, inclusive of that, right? But not exclusive to that. And I think the reason that people maybe hone in on that is because sex, sexuality, our erotic relationship probably is one of, and for some people, the most vulnerable making domains within our relationship. And so I think we just ended up conflating the two. Unfortunately, it's quite possible, and many couples do find themselves in the space where they have a sexual relationship, but they don't necessarily have a sexually intimate relationship. Those are two different things. One is a little functional, right?
Totally.
And the other is like deeply connecting. The other is more a sort of erotic spirituality.
One of the things that can happen also in that exchange, and by the way, I believe it was chapter 15 where you really get into sex in the book. The book is about intimacy, but only one chapter is about sexuality and eroticism. And I'm glad you covered it as well. I trip on the idea, by the way, that you can have a very intimate relationship, but not a very erotic relationship, or you can have a very erotic relationship, but not a very intimate relationship, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And one of the things that seems to get in the way of intimacy, even the context of eroticism, is these pop-ups that show up in our head like, oh my gosh, how am I doing? I feel so self-conscious here. And you and I spoke offline and you shared with me, of all things, a quote of St. Francis. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe some hacks so that people could have greater eroticism and intimacy.
The quote that I often use with the couples that I work with, and it's just part of St. Francis's Serenity Prayer. It's something like, may I first seek to understand before I seek to be understood. And to me, in some ways, it's really at the heart of perhaps the most profound thing that we can do in our relationship, the sort of highest order relationship skill, right? Because I think our first instinct is to fight to be understood.
Totally.
And for most couples, most partners, that really is the clash in the moment of me trying to be understood and you trying to be understood at the same time is like two fire hoses pointed at each other, right? It's all output, right? And nobody's actually absorbing anything. And it's a profound act of humility and practice to be able to turn that around. And just for the moment, maybe just for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to prioritize understanding you before I prioritize being understood. And in practice, what we find is if you can do that, and it's so much easier said than done, but if you can do that, you actually do pave the way in this really gentle and inviting way for you to be understood more deeply as well. But you have to give first before you can get. And that's a practice, right? It doesn't necessarily come naturally to us. And I think what we'll find, and what we do find, is that practice of prioritizing the other person's sense of being understood, prioritizing your partner's sense of being connected to, of feeling loved, of feeling prioritized, of feeling worthy of your curiosity. That's actually surprisingly erotic.
I'm just smiling and kind of laughing because that's so true. That is so true. And it's so rarely stated.
Yeah.
Totally.
To the point that you were sort of highlighting earlier, it's just because in some ways it is how we are trying to be vigilant about and protective of our own vulnerability. Most of the time, we are thinking about ourselves. Well, how am I being perceived? How am I doing? It's all rooted in, I feel at risk, but it blinds us, right? Because most of my bandwidth is being taken up worrying about how you're seeing me, worrying about how you're understanding me. And it's just in the history of relationships, it's never worked well to create, deepen, and sustain intimacy.
I'm remembering, this is just such a random, stupid thought, but I have to share it because it's so funny and it illustrates. When we're in our teens, as you and I both know, there's this phenomenon called the imaginary audience. We become very self-conscious. We imagine that people are clowning on us. And I remember in high school walking home with a very attractive female, and nothing became of it, of course. But I remember being so self-conscious about the possibility that I might have some type of facial characteristic that was, I don't remember what it was, whether I was worried that there was something under my nose that maybe needed to blow my nose. And there was no such thing. But I remember completely severed my ability to connect with this person because I was so obsessed with that. And what do I hear in my office all the time? I hear about people who have difficulty getting an erection or having an orgasm or being just in that beautiful space that has been created by themselves and their partner because they're so self-absorbed with how am I looking? How am I performing? How am I doing? Rather than how's this connection going? And isn't this amazing? This is actually happening or something perhaps more conducive to intimacy.
It's unfortunate, but I can feel such compassion for it, right? Because it is how we're trying to protect ourselves. But we really do have to get over ourselves. If we're going to be able to, good at connecting with others, right? If most of my concern is about what's going on with me, I just have very little attention left to be curious about my partner. You know that concept, Esther Perel's concept of mating in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
The basic idea is that we get to know each other so well that we aren't attracted anymore. We're like such good friends that sort of the mystery of eroticism goes away. And I think that that happens when we sort of delude ourselves into thinking that I know you so well. And whenever we delude ourselves into thinking like, I know you from yesterday or last week or last year, and that you doesn't exist anymore. You know, if I can stay open-hearted to aware that you are constantly changing and that the person you are today is not the person you were yesterday. And I can cultivate that practice of bringing that sort of excited, loving curiosity to getting to know who you are today. That phenomena doesn't work. You're not mating in captivity. This isn't somebody that I know. This is somebody that I'm just getting to know.
That is such a good tip. And it's entirely true. We need the mystery. And if we accept this reality that we are constantly in flux, we are fluid, we are dynamic, we are changing, we're not the same people that we were yesterday. The cells in our body are constantly in flux. And so are our psyches. And if we can continue this kind of Indiana Jones-like discovery process of adventure,
right,
it keeps things hot. And I was wondering, what are some of your other just favorite tips before we go on that you offer couples that you've seen work in terms of cultivating intimacy?
So certainly the seeking to understand before seeking to be understood. That's huge.
Huge.
I think it is also this practice of really being able to identify and lead with your actual vulnerable authenticity. I think our instincts to protect ourselves, especially when we're anxious or maybe a little hurt, we lead with our bodyguards.
Oh, God, yes.
And bodyguards really only do one thing. They just kick ass, right? And they
one-trick ponies.
Yeah. They're not good at the connecting part.
Not at all.
Again, it's a skill that I think we have to develop, our ability to speak from the heart, to be able to name what feels most true from that place of authenticity and vulnerability, right? So like, this is what it's actually like for me today. I was talking with a friend last week about how, we pass each other in the hall and we say, hey, how's it going? And we sort of lead with that best foot forward that's like, great, I'm doing great, or fine, or whatever, that automatic response. And I was like, if we were being authentic when we passed each other in the hall, right, would be like, hey, how's it going? I'm really uncomfortable. How are you doing? Oh, me too. I'm also really uncomfortable. Just that willingness to be seen is a practice, and it doesn't come particularly naturally to us. So it's the two things meeting each other, right? I'm curious about you. I want to understand you. And then that has to be met with, I'm willing to sort of be naked. I'm willing to show up and let you know me.
That's such an important piece. I'm thinking about the idea of what got you here won't get you there, the coping strategies that we've acquired over the years so that we could survive, or oftentimes don't serve us in the context of relationships. It's almost like having that bodyguard, as you were saying, or I often say, would you want to sleep in chainmail? Would you want to sleep in armor? No is the answer, let alone Kevlar. You don't want any of that in bed. And if that's on you all the time, there will be no intimacy. It will mediate things so profoundly. And that type of intimacy, of course, needs to be earned. And I guess I wonder, how is that earned?
So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. One of the analogies that I use in the book, it's a metaphor for intimacy that I just kind of in love with. It's called Porcupine's Dilemma. And so the porcupine's dilemma is that it's a mammal covered in quills. The porcupine wants to get in there inside a quill's distance to get that warmth. Have you seen some of these porcupines online?
No, I've never seen it, but the image, and you brought it up in the book, it's so great.
Just want to snuggle them. And of course, a porcupine wants to be snuggled. Oh. And so this is us, right? Like we want to get in there and we want to snuggle each other. But when you get in there close, you're inside a quill's distance and you're going to get poked. That is the nature and sort of the existential dilemma of intimacy, right? Is that the closer you are to somebody, the more you have made yourself vulnerable to them and them vulnerable to you, the more frequently, just inadvertently, accidentally, just a happenstance of the day, you're going to end up quilling each other. You're going to poke each other, and that's going to sting. And so our natural biological instinct when we feel ouch is either fight or flight. And neither fight or flight is good for intimacy. It makes us pull outside of quill's distance. And so in the initial phases of our relationship, we're trying to earn that intimate space. So we get in there really close, and then we get poked and we pull away, fight or flight. And then we try again and we get poked and we pull away, fight or flight. And unfortunately, I think for most couples, the compromise that they end up making is close, but not too close. I want to be as close as I can get to you, but still stay outside of quill's distance. And then we wonder why we feel lonely in our relationships. But I just learned, I think maybe this week, last week, that porcupine quills have a natural antibiotic on them.
That's amazing.
Which is so sweet because it's built into the system that when we poke each other, we're already working on making sure that we're not harming each other, right? That we're putting the ingredients in there that will lead to healing. And so one of the most fundamental skills inside a truly intimate relationship is to be able to admit, oh, I poked you. I'm so sorry. And then to be able to engage in like sweet, open-hearted, effective repair. Because if we can't acknowledge that we've harmed, even small harms, inadvertent harms, and lovingly care for that harm, then we're going to end up outside of quill's distance. And so many couples are in long-term relationships where they're actually kind of lonely because that's the compromise that they've made. And we need to be able to learn these skills of staying inside of quill's distance, which has so much to do with how we manage our vulnerability and how we care for the vulnerability of our partner.
Yeah, James. Initially, when you were rendering the Porcupine's Dilemma, I thought it should be a play written by Sophocles because it's such a Greek tragedy of the human condition. It's like, damn it. And yet you added somehow a twist. It's almost like, oh, Henry gone positive. It's like, wait, on the other side, there's actually a positive, almost a Disney-esque, but without the saccharine. There's a good ending here. So I love that. We need the skills to attend to our prickliness because the prickliness is inevitable. And there are skills that we can cultivate. And you refer to our actions not as being good or bad, but skillful versus unskillful. And the Porcupine's Dilemma is a perfect example of that. Again, I'm just effervescing over your book. It was such a great read. And already I feel like I'm a better person in the context of my own relationship. So the question I must ask you then is, what are some simple practices that we can engage for intimacy health checkups?
So the vision that I have, and this is one that we're sort of working towards, is that anytime anybody wants a annual relationship health checkup, that they can just go to a local provider and get one. So ideally, we would have an army of trained relationship healthcare providers that could provide this kind of checkup on a regular basis. We're not there yet. Right now, when it comes to relationship healthcare, our culture is a little bit stuck thinking about it as a case of emergency break glass kind of thing. It's a tertiary kind of treatment. It's the sort of treatment that we only seek when we've been in pain for a long time. And I'd really love for us to start the practice of treating our relationships with the same care that we treat our physical health. And like I said, our dental health, even the health of our cars. Like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? If we were going in for regular relationship health checkups, I think that could be transformative in terms of helping us to keep our relationship strong for the long run. In the absence of having that sort of provider-driven checkup readily available, I think even just checking in with ourselves, checking in with each other on a regular basis, whether that's once a quarter, once a year, where we really sit down and take a step back and check in. How are things going? What are the things that are best about us as a couple? What are the places where we've started to maybe turn away from each other? And how might we find our way to turn back towards each other in these places that we've been struggling? Sometimes we can do that on our own. And that's a lot of the practices that I talk about in the book are intended to help us do that on our own. And sometimes it might help to sit down with somebody like Adam for just even 1 or 2 sessions. Like we're sort of stuck in this one little place and we just need a little boost so that we're not resting on our laurels. We are actively engaged in a practice of deepening and sustaining the intimacy in our relationship.
Love that idea so much. And I share in your wish that we had the resources available and perhaps the awareness that going in for your annual or biannual checkup, I've always had difficulty with biannual. I think it goes both ways, but twice a year,
right,
at least, and if not quarterly checkup. I think it's really important. And I love that you started with the strengths. Mm-hmm. It was almost like a SWOT analysis that was used. I think it's still somewhat used in the corporate sphere of kind of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I think those what they stand for. And if a couple were to try to do this on their own without the intervention of a person like you or me, not at the exclusion of seeing us, of course, but if they were to want to just initiate this before coming to see us, what would be some of the questions you'd have them ask? You started with the strengths, like what do we need to work on? Any other questions you might have them ask, maybe about the yearnings? Where do we want to be in 5 years from now? Like, given that life seems endless, and yet we have some evidence that it's probably not. What would be the best use of this summer vacation? Things like that.
Yes. I think one of the questions that I would really love it if we asked each other just somewhat more often is, what is it that I do? What is it that I could do that makes you feel the most loved?
What an elegantly phrased question. It feels like love language is on steroids. I love that.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm not going to pivot to sex quite yet. A little more foreplay first. But let's get into some of your amazing metaphors. One of my favorites, one of them that just made my brain happy. I think a lot about something that your former teacher, John Gottman, who is a mathematician turned psychologist who's really brought the research to the fore on relationship therapy, has made a massive, just massive contribution to the literature, like just overwhelmingly so. He talks about the golden ratio of we need 5 positives to 1 negative interaction to keep us in a net positive, which I've always found rather puzzling. It's a total digression, but 3 to 1, 3 positives to 1 negative means we'll be a net neutral. I've always wondered what happens to 4 to 1 because there is no accounting for that, but apparently it's 5 to 1 that keeps us a net positive. You brilliantly, and you talked about the fact that these interactions don't go away necessarily. It's not like it's forgive and forget entirely. It's these things remain, but we can still stay in a net positive and that we will hurt each other. But let's go to one of your metaphors and your thoughts on the golden ratio.
The way that I think about this, the way I sort of envision it in my head is every interaction that we have with our partner has a color to it. If it's a positive interaction, if it feels even just a little bit yummy, then we can think about that as a golden ball. And you just add that golden ball to this translucent container, sort of like this cylinder that represents every interaction that you've ever had with your partner. And so every positive interaction, every yummy interaction is this golden ball that you're putting in. And once you've put that ball in, you can never take it back out. Life is additive. We never get to subtract anything. And it's necessary, right? Every interaction that we have with our partner that stings a little bit, that hurts a little bit, or disappoints a little bit is like a gray ball. And then you add that gray ball into that container. And at any point, you can stand back from the container and just see what is its general color tone. Is it more golden or is it more gray? And what we know from both from research and just our own lived experience is if I'm coming home at the end of the day and my experience with you is so much more richly tuned towards the yummy, towards the positive. When I come through the door at the end of the day, I'm seeking you out because I'm just drawn to you. But when that ratio starts to fall off, where it's 4 to 1, 3 to 1, even 2 to 1, our bodies feel, as we said in the door, like this is complicated. You know, if I walk into the room where my partner is it going to be a yummy interaction or is it going to be a stressful interaction or a painful interaction, even if just a little bit painful? And we have lots of choices. Come home at the end of the day and the lawn needs to be mowed and the dishes need to be washed and the dog certainly needs to be petted or the cat, right? And so we will take what I call the path of least emotional resistance. And so you walk in the door and you might not even be thinking consciously of this, but you're going to move towards where you're most comfortable. If that ratio of golden to gray balls has fallen off in your relationship, you're swimming uphill to move towards your partner. Of course, the challenge in this, in our relationships, is that we are living in such close physical and emotional proximity. This is my metaphor that I stole about the porcupine's dilemma, right? It's like we're two porcupines living in the same hovel hole. We want to be close to each other because that's where all the yummy warmth is. And we're going to be inside of Quill's distance. So we're going to poke each other from time to time. And the hardest one, I think, for us to wrap our heads around is all feedback comes at the point of a quill. Even if I just say like, oh, I like my toast toastier than that. Seems like a simple thing that shouldn't hurt, but it's a little bit of feedback to my partner or that I received from my partner, and it's going to sting a little bit. So we have to be able to give each other feedback. Feedback always stings. And in order for us to maintain that ratio, that means we have to be really mindful about making sure that we are being relentlessly affirming to our partner, that there's just so much expressed gratitude, so much expressed love, so much expressed connection. I want my partner to know, and I want to feel in my bones how lucky I am to be with you today and every day. Not just that I said that once, but that I'm cultivating a way of being in a relationship where like it just washes over me at least once a day. God damn, I am so lucky that I get to be with you. And then I say it out loud. And that's it. If we could just formulate that kind of practice, then when I have to say, that's not the side of my toast I like buttered, right? We're just so much more resilient to receiving that. Our natural human inclination, though, unfortunately, is that what draws our attention most readily are the things that are annoying to us. And so it's really simple in our relationships for most of the things that we say to each other to be about the annoyances. And it is a practice to switch that around so that most of the things that we say to each other are loving, kind, generous, affirming things.
That's so interesting. There's so many thoughts that I have as you're speaking. It's just so rich. Up to and including the toasts people give to their loved ones. Sometimes they're really kind of crap, kind of more like a complaint list rather than a toast. Yeah. And then, of course, comes the retort of, well, you need to be able to take it. The other thought I have is the idea of the golden hue versus the gray hue of the jar.
Mm-hmm.
Calls to mind that great quote from Maya Angelou: people will forget what you said or did, but they'll remember how they felt when they were with you. And lo and behold, these words of a poet were later corroborated by neuroscience and neuroimaging. Yeah. And here you are saying it in the context of a jar. We remember how we feel. And when we drive home from work, perhaps, we may listen extra long to that podcast or that song, kind of maybe a little shaking as we're going in the house if the jar has kind of got more of a gray hue to it. We may be full of dread. We may be delighted to see our partner if it's got more of a golden hue. Right. And gratitude is such an important thing. You mentioned at one point in your book, 108 gratitudes, which is actually believed derived from a Judaic practice of having 108 prayers of gratitude throughout the day, trying to find 108 things to be grateful for, including when we have a good trip to the bathroom, because anybody who knows what it's like to have a bad trip to the bathroom knows that kind of that Thich Nhat Hanh quote of when we have a sore throat, we become enlightened. We know how good it feels not to have a sore throat. And the same thing can be said by anyone to a good or bad trip to the bathroom that we generally just take for granted. What I'm also hearing in the parentheses is that you're not suggesting that people override being maltreated with gratitude, but rather that if they're in an otherwise functional relationship, that we lean into gratitude, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, one of the things that we've discovered in the research is gratitude has to be a practice. It doesn't come naturally to us. Complaining, for whatever reason, our evolutionary heritage, complaining is like falling off a log. That takes no effort. But somehow our better angels, the expression of gratitude, that's more like staying balanced on the log. That takes practice and skill. And we also know that when you do practice it, it has such a benefit to our mental and emotional health.
You know, I'm thinking neurophysiologically now because the complaint department resides on the lower floor, as does that beautiful quote from St. Francis, who, even as a Jewish person, he's definitely my saint. I'm an animal lover and I live near San Francisco. And I've always been a fan of St. Francis of Assisi. But even the notion of, may I seek to understand before being understood, neurophysiologically, we want to feel vindicated from our amygdala center, from our emotional centers, which reside lower in the brain, than to understand, which happens up here. So everything, it seems, is more of a top-down approach. Like, let's start. In many ways, it sounds like the bridge is created by overriding our primitive needs, desires. Let's talk about the bugs in the brain that just get in the way, that cause us to basically engage in sabotage to the things that matter most.
This is so much the fundamental challenge in an intimate relationship, right? Because we are going to sting each other. I come down the stairs in the morning before I've had my cup of coffee and I'm grumbly. And that grumbly is going to be at least a little bit painful to my partner, even if she knows exactly why I'm grumbly.
Not a morning person.
That's just built into the system. We are going to sting each other. Like I said, any feedback that we give each other is also going to sting. And we have been designed by our evolutionary heritage to respond to pain with fight or flight. So you grumble at me and I grumble back at you, or you grumble at me and I go away. Our instinct is to either hurt you back to show you how it feels, right? Or, okay, if you're just going to be that way, then I'm going to be somewhere else. And the counterintuitive, the existential challenge in that spot is neither fight nor flight is at all conducive to intimacy. Fight and flight are corrosive to intimacy. And this is why it has to be a practice. How do we do the thing that is counter to what our entire evolutionary heritage has told us to do? If you sting me, I sting you back, or I withdraw out of sting's distance. And instead, to turn towards, oh, something's hurting you. Help me understand what's hurting you so that I can care about it. I talk about this, I think, in the book.
I quoted that one. That was so good.
Yeah. As like reaching through the dragon.
Right in here. Right? I mean, that's just so good. You said, oh, sweetie, you're really upset. That totally makes sense to me. And I'm here to help you in whatever way I can. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want me to keep you company? Is there something I can do that would be helpful? That is so well articulated. Because when we're grumbly or mad, we need the oh sweetie voice from the outside because we're not going to respond to anything else. And it's so hard to render an oh sweetie in the face of, it's like it's much harder to do. So you nailed it from my vantage point. Like I literally had to quote your book from that. Oh, so good.
I sometimes talk about it as reaching through the dragon. The dragon is like our bodyguard. So something happens that hurts me and my dragon comes out to protect me. It's my anger, it's my withdrawal, whatever it is, but it's got a fierceness to it. But that's the part that you make contact with. You don't make contact with my hurt. You make contact with my dragon, which hurts you. And then your dragon comes out. And now we've got a fight between dragons. Whereas if I've done something that's hurt you and your dragon comes forward to confront me, if I can just reach through that dragon, if I can sort of scooch it off to the side and say, yep, I see the dragon. And behind that, I can see that you're hurt. Tell me about what happened. Something that I just did or failed to do stung and hurt a little bit. And I want to know what that was. And I want you to know that I care. And then the dragon just dissipates. Again, it's got to be a practice because you've got to have a certain quality of strength and vulnerability to be able to withstand that first encounter with the dragon without responding with your own dragon, to be able to meet the dragon with compassion. And if you can meet the dragon with compassion, then you're, as we said earlier, cooking with fire. Then you really are cultivating an intimate relationship and not just a relationship where when we're fussy, we just fuss at each other. And then we go off into our separate corners and do our separate things.
I know the title's already been put into stone. And yet, if I were to come up with an alternative title for your book, I would call it How to Become a Love Jedi. Like you, or a Jedi of Love. Totally. I mean, there's so many skills that I'm convinced would help the world so much. And we have these primitive brains that do everything in their power to survive and to conserve energy, but they don't really go to the higher levels of what will it take to have an awesome life. And this book is really, of all of the skills available, I think this is one of the most important in terms of having an awesome life. Let's pivot to sex. Let's get into what a lot of people probably think the book is about. And thankfully, there's a great chapter on it, one of my favorite chapters on sex so far. One of the things that you mention, and I've seen it without fail, when somebody tells me their sex life sucks, one of my first questions is, well, how well do you speak sex as a second language with your partner? How frank are you? Do you use euphemisms like down there and whatever? How easy is it for you to speak? And they usually say about a 1 out of 10 or certainly sub 5. And you were the first person I've ever heard make note of the fact that people in same-sex relationships have a much easier time of linguistically attuning to sex. But there is something about the cross-cultural nature of having different body parts that makes it far more vulnerable. But it seems like that was square one from where I saw it. What are some of your favorite tips for having a better sex life?
I think, as in all of these areas of intimacy, it's about turning toward the thing that our instinct is to turn away from. We are brought up in this culture that, on the one hand, is constantly trying to sell us things with sex. And on the other hand, is telling us that sex is embarrassing, dirty, shameful in some way. We absorb all these messages, which is why I think when opposite sex couples get together, there's so much vulnerability on the line. There's so much of that sense of all the things that are rejectable about me are right here in the bedroom with us. My body, my attraction, my sensuality, my need to be wanted, my need to feel attractive and affirmed, and to not be rejected. That's the biggest vulnerability. God, just don't let me do anything rejectable right now. And so we don't talk to each other because it seems like putting words on what's happening right now, being in open communication, is risking rejection. It's risking something going wrong. So we don't do that. And in the absence of that, all we're doing is guessing. And then, to the point that you were making earlier, right? The only person I'm in a relationship right now is with the things that are going on in my head. And my partner's relationship was with the things that are going on in her head. And we're not communicating. We're not communicating with words. We're not communicating with our bodies. We're just trying to get in and out of this vulnerable moment as unscathed as possible. Again, the practice is to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to recognize and to start to be able to teach ourselves that real strength comes from our capacity to be vulnerable with each other and to meet each other's vulnerability with warmth and with connection and with acceptance. And couples can communicate with each other in that open-hearted way before, during, and after sex. Then those are the couples, and we know this from the research, that have the most vibrant, fulfilling sex lives. And couples that can't talk and connect with each other before, during, and after sex don't, because it's so vulnerable that we end up turning away from each other. Even while we're physically connected, we're turned away.
You know, I think about Esther Perel quite a lot. And one of the things she talks about is differentiating the two terms, intimacy and eroticism. So you can have a very intimate relationship and a very unerotic relationship. You can have a very erotic relationship and not an intimate one. But what you're also suggesting is that in the context of a long-term relationship, the likelihood of having an erotic relationship while not having an intimate relationship is low. And I agree with that sentiment. I think that you said something akin to, and I'm going to paraphrase it poorly, you know, what goes on outside the bedroom is what goes on inside the bedroom. And I love this idea that you just said. So great. It's so great. Turning toward the thing that we are compelled to turn away from. And I remember in driver's education learning that if you are ever on ice and you skid, you're meant to turn in the direction of the skid, which defies
emotionally counterintuitive, right?
It's so emotionally counterintuitive. And basically you're saying the same thing. And then you're also talking about the vulnerability. I'm kind of find myself kind of talking like Seinfeld a little bit. Seinfeld once said that if I'm on a nude beach, this is it. There's nothing else. I agree with that idea. Like, that's a funny joke, and it's the truth. Like, you're on a nude beach, you don't get to hide behind anything else. This is it. And in this exchange, I'm not feeling so good about my body at the moment, or like, what if she's been with somebody who had a better body and she was more attracted to, or whatever. All of these ghosts show up for both parties, potentially.
Right.
And if you were to kind of go in and perform an ectomy of sorts, like to remove some of these thoughts, cognitive ectomy, removing some of the cognition, some of the thoughts that may interfere with what's going on now, since mindfulness is being aware of what's going on while it's going on. What would be some of the things that you'd, maybe less of an ectomy and more of a, what would you infuse their thoughts with?
For me, the infusion is the practice of savoring.
Yes, for sure.
That everything that is undermining the quality of a moment of eroticism in our relationship are the things that are distracting us from savoring what's arising in the moment. And we want to practice being connoisseurs of the moment. And so if the ectomy part of it is like, take out all the stuff that's distracting you, and the mindfulness part is just bring your entire attention to savoring what you're experiencing. So this is beyond the self. This is beyond self and other. This is this moment of mutual savoring. And it doesn't matter what your body looks like. You were talking about drinking wine earlier, right? Like when you drink a really good glass of wine, you're not worried about what your body looks like. This glass has had other people's mouths on it before, right? It's just like this, you're bringing your entirety of your attention into the complexity and the richness of savoring this very brief moment. That's the thing that I want people to practice in their sexual relationships. This is going to be a moment of savoring, and whatever happens can be savored.
Dear listener, the verb savor has been put under the scrutiny of the microscope in research, and it's one of the most important findings in positive psychology. You know, you see people at restaurants, at these delicious, amazing restaurants, and they're on their phones eating these foods, not really savoring the food. And we're basically doing that in the bedroom when we allow our thoughts to go elsewhere rather than what's happening right now. That image of the wine glass and not thinking about your body while you're drinking the wine, and really, really zeroing in on what's happening while it's happening. Just really, I can't thank you enough for having written this book. It's such a big deal. Is there anything I haven't asked that I should have asked before I get to my big final question?
Well, my coworkers would be upset at me if I didn't point folks towards the resource, both the things that are in the book and the other stuff that I've sort of focused on in terms of regular relationship health checkups are available to sort of learn more about from our website, which is aramu.com. And Aramu, ARAMMU, we believe, having done our thorough Google research, is the original written word for love in ancient Sumeric word for love. So if you're interested in learning more about the stuff that we do, aramu.com.
Absolutely. Will be in the show notes. And wow, James, fantastic. Well, James, I'm going to ask you my final magical question.
Yes.
If you had the capacity, the power to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of the individual, and since we're all connected, perhaps those around that individual as well, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would impact the individual as well as perhaps society at large?
I think that skill for me would be to know how to turn toward and be generously, compassionately intimate with our own experience, with whatever is arising in this moment. I think that that is the place from which we have our deepest sense of wellness. That's the place from which we experience the least suffering, when what is arising is just this. It just has this beautiful thusness to it. And I think that the way that that benefits everyone is, for whatever reason, when we're able to contact our own experience in that very deeply intimate way, we become infinitely more compassionate to each other, because you feel your way into the fact that we aren't separate.
That separateness is an illusion.
Exactly.
I aramu that.
I love that. I'm so stealing that. It's a verb. Yeah.
My man, I had great expectations, but you blew them away. So,
thank you.
James, this has been an overwhelming blast. I know my listeners will benefit tremendously. I could not recommend the book more. Available in print and in Kindle at present. Hopefully, at some point, be available in Audible.
I would love that. That is my next big goal. I'm trying to talk Guilford into letting us do an audible version of it.
Okay. Well, Guilford, you've heard it here. The Mindful Path to Intimacy is available at all outlets. And if it's not, ask for it by name. It's fantastic. Just so happy to know you. And may this be the beginning of many future interactions.
I hope so. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.